We are very privileged this evening to have with us David Grief, who is a former senior clerk at Essex Court Chambers in London. And Essex Court is one of the preeminent commercial sets of barristers' chambers in the UK. David was also the chief executive of Essex Court Duxton, which was based in Singapore. He then retired as a barrister's clerk last year, I think, and now has his own setup, his own consultancy practice named David Grief International Consultancy Private Limited. And to give our members of the audience an idea as to how accomplished David is, upon his retirement last year, the Times newspaper in the UK described David as a giant among clerks. And that is why we are very honored and very privileged to have David speak to us this evening on a topic that he is indisputably an expert in, which is marketing in the legal profession. David, welcome. Very happy to have you with us this evening. And if I can just begin the questions by asking you to describe what were the main functions as a barrister's clerk when you were at Essex Court Chambers?
Say that again. Sorry, I just got. So, what were the main functions? Question one.
That's
Apologies.
right.
Yes. The functions of a senior clerk, depending on the set of chambers. We were a set of chambers which was 80 strong. When I started in, as we then were in 1980, when I started for Essex Court, we were a set that were 21 members. When I left, we were a set that was pushing just 100. So as senior clerk all the way through is sort of managing the set jointly with the head of chambers and the management committee. The longest serving head of chambers in my time as senior clerk was Gordon Pollock. And it was a bit like a sort of benign dictatorship. I mean, he just let me, I was very lucky to get on doing what I get, and you know, I'd bring him to date, but I was quite in the way I ran the set. So I was sort of in charge of the overall direction of chambers. I was involved with each member of chambers. So as chambers grew, the clerks room split into teams. So you had the silk team, the senior junior team, the junior team, and it was the key clerks dealt with their teams on a day-to-day basis. But when it came to practice reviews, I was involved with all those practice reviews. In particularly, though, some senior clerks in some sets of chambers too much on the senior people and not the junior people. I always took the view important people with the junior people, getting off senior, you've got to practice much care and attention other than with team leaders. As chambers, so again in my early days, I used to have to do accounts. I used to make sure that the practicing certificates were renewed, the insurance was up to date, the budget to deal with events. As time went on, chambers grew. Chambers then got an office manager that took that stuff off my shoulders. Then there was a sort of business development. We then, in time, had marketing people that I worked closely with. So as time went on, we had all sorts of people to fulfill all sorts of functions, which we see with what's going on. It's, you know, it's been described as a bit you know, manager. I've got my players. You know, if we were described as Manchester United, at least under the previous man, or the long-running manager, maybe Liverpool now. Got your team. What? it's a massive undertaking, and no day is the same.
Thanks a lot, David. That's a very useful overview. Now, as I understand it, one of the main functions as a clerk was to get briefs for your chambers, if I'm describing it in a very simplistic way. Would you be able to tell us what steps did you take to develop relationships with solicitors in the UK or even in-house counsel to get work for your chambers?
So again, winding back to when I started in 1980, which is over 40 years ago, the idea of marketing just wasn't happening. It was thought sort of bad form, almost touting, though I never regarded it as touting. So I was lucky. I was senior clerk at the age of 23. And I was in a trust and tax set, which was part of my journey to Essex Court Chambers, and I was senior clerk at Essex Court Chambers when I was 26. When I was senior clerk in Lincoln's Inn, I didn't do any marketing. We had a profile in the world of trust and tax. The phone rang. I certainly didn't go off down to see law firms for coffee or anything like that. But when I arrived in Essex Court Chambers in 1980, it was quite different. In Lincoln's Inn, trust and tax, the instructing solicitor was always Mr., never Christian names. But when I got to for Essex Court, the commercial world, the Holman Fenwicks, the Inces, the Clydes, the Salford Mays, Linklaters, everybody suddenly was by Christian name. So, and that was a big change in my life. But suddenly you realize that instead of someone, they were John or Fred or Robert or whatever. It made it easier to build relationships. And I, from quite earlier on, just wanted to understand the commercial world a bit more, particularly the commercial world in London, and would pop down to see solicitors from chambers and what was going on their firm, what was going on in chambers. They were the early days of sort of marketing. There was no brochures, there was no website, there was nothing. It was just me with a list of members of chambers and pop down to see them. So that was how I, in the early days, started to build the relationship. And then that we had quite a lot of instructions who came in what was described as the provinces: Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, Cardiff. And again, those places all seemed a long way away. And I was the first clerk really that set off from London and headed up to Manchester, headed to Leeds, headed to Cardiff. And the partner at Addleshaws in the days, John Gatenby, the senior partner, he said, "David, this is amazing. The senior clerk from 42 King Street, Manchester, over the road, has never walked over the road to see me. You come all the way from London. You don't need to say anything. You can just pack up and go home again because you've made a statement by making the effort." And that's how I sort of got on. And I did the same in Leeds and across all the provinces, except when it came to Cardiff, one of the senior juniors then, who then became a Silk and then ended up as UK's Chief Justice, Lord Thomas. John came from Wales. He felt that me from London shouldn't disadvantage Cardiff. So he thought that it wasn't a good idea that I went to Cardiff because he thought that was unfair and that Wales should get on with Wales and should leave Wales alone. I did eventually go to Cardiff, but John was quite against me heading off to Cardiff. He was very protective of the Welsh circuit as it was. But so that's how I just and in-house, I had good relationships with ICI, good relationships with, but there was a view that the in-house came to the bar direct. The in-house didn't come to the bar that much. So we had some in-house connections, and I made the most of them. But I was never one to go knocking on doors unless the opportunity arose that they came to me. It was more accountancy firms. We had a big profile in the world of indirect tax, VAT or GST as you used to know it. So I would make a point of going to see accountancy firms, and they were quite different they were more like in-house than they were law firms. But that's how I got off. So it was getting out of my seat and just heading off. And it helped a lot, because when I was talking to law firms, particularly out of London, I knew where they sat, I knew the view out of the window, they'd met me, and when you were having difficult conversations about fees or taking on cases or whatever, they'd met me, and I'd met them, and made those conversations easier. But I was the sort of trailblazer in getting off and getting out there. And then, in time that extended to coming to Singapore and KL. My first trip to this part of the world was November '81. KL was 1983, and lunch at the Selangor club and having banana leaf curry, and then embarrassing you, Greg, meeting your dad then, and so those relationships go back again almost 40 years. But I was the trailblazer. Clerk just didn't do that. But again, I built relationships in Singapore, and in Malaysia and in Hong Kong to begin with, and then went across the world. And that's what gets talked about in the press, and how I helped to develop the English bar abroad.
Yeah, that's right. We'll come to the mode of these meetings a little later on, whether it's in person or having perhaps a little less direct contact. We'll come to that a little later on. But if we can just move to another issue, as I understand it, in the early days of clerkship, if we can call it that, within chambers, the clerk would often decide which barrister was to argue a brief. Now, when that occurred, what were the aspects that you considered when deciding which barrister was to get a brief?
This was, in my mind, the most enjoyable part of the job, and slowly it has eroded because there's such things as directories and websites, and more lawyers have relationships with the bar, which at that time didn't happen so much, because the bar was seen as a bit more of an ivory tower, unapproachable, etc., etc. So yes, I would invariably get calls from from in the UK and across the world as, we've got this case, and who do you think? And I always felt that I knew my members, and often I knew the instructing solicitor, instructing lawyer. So in part it was like a match, like a marriage. Some of these cases go on for years, and you want the thing to be a happy working relationship. So you put together people you believe would get on. And then there is the expertise. This is an insurance case, shipping case, the type of insurance case, and I know I just had a sort of intuition that the first come on, I'd want him to explain to me what the case is about. Is it a shipping case? Is it the marriage? Is it charter party? Is it a collision, or whatever it is? And you just had a feel for the right person for the job. And the most satisfying part was at the end of the case, which could be some years, the solicitor would ring me up saying it was, we had it didn't always win them, but we had a good run, really enjoyed the relationship, and thank you for putting us together. And of course, once you make those relationships, it's up for the barrister to sort of make sure the next case comes along. So that's how I did it. So a lot of authority, and solicitors trusted me with the advice that I was giving. So it is trust.
Sure. Now, David, over your career, you've worked with a number of barristers. What would you say were the qualities of successful barristers that you've worked with that made them stand out?
I think I always described this as the X factor. The most successful barrister is not only being knowing the law, good at what he does in court and cross-examination, but is approachable. He's someone who is not challenged and just can get on with everybody. And that's what draws the clients to them. I mean, in Essex court chambers, the knowledge of the law is a given, but it is all about personalities. And the most successful is having all those qualities as well as being approachable. And the thing is too much, not getting irritated with those thoughts. And that's and I can spot it, and I can, having years behind me, I can pull members of chambers up on various things. But it is, and you get that, if you're instructing solicitors, instructing lawyers, and often I can bring up some issues with the barristers to try and create them as slightly better, because they don't know what can be improved, but I've got to have the courage to tell them how they ought to just do things a bit differently. So the relationship between the barrister and the clerk is absolute must. For me to be able to not tell them off, but for me to be able to say what I say and they tell me what they think. I mean, I would never. I mean, I could argue with a barrister to a point, but I know at which point to give up, because you can argue. They're always better at arguing. Whatever the point is, they can argue it better than I can. So I know when to withdraw.
Sure. No, and if I can just maybe move along down your career a little bit. I mentioned earlier you were the chief executive of Essex Court in Duxton, and that was based in Singapore. Would you be able to tell us what caused your move to Singapore?
So I've been coming to Singapore for 40 years, and I regarded Singapore as my second home. I always saw a future here, particularly with the world of arbitration, development of Maxwell Chambers, the way the Singapore International Arbitration Centre was going, and because of my relationships with, take Justice Quinton Lowe. He was one of the first people I met for coffee in November 1981. I was 28, he was 32. And as I was getting more senior, he was getting more senior. He was right up there with Stephen Chong, Sundra Menon, all these people. And I was, I'd be here and they'd say, David, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? We're thinking about doing that. What do you think? And I was increasingly bought into Singapore's development. And as and I was moving on towards 65, and at some stage I was going to have to be not thrown out of Chambers, but Chambers might suggest that perhaps the time has come, you might like to move on. So it was always, for me, I saw Singapore as my future, and I would bore the senior judiciary as to how I wanted to be the first senior clerk in Singapore. That was always my line. And then something I talked to Toby Lando about, something I talked to John Fei Ong about, as to how we might do something here. And Chambers had already started. It had space at Maxwell Chambers along with 20 Essex Street, Fountain Court, 1 Essex Court. So, and Singapore were very keen on the international sets having a profile at Maxwell Chambers. But I just felt that we should go one better and try and have a flag in the ground. It helped because Toby Landau got fully admitted to the Singapore bar, so that was the first success. And then this idea of sort of building a set, and I was personally responsible for persuading at the beginning V.K. Raja, when he retired as AG, to come and join us. I had breakfast with him on the 4th of January 2017. I remember that breakfast to the day. But no. I got so many others but I had to persuade towards the end of breakfast. He saw this as an opportunity. In October 2017, Chambers was formed, and I was appointed chief executive. I didn't particularly, if I'm completely honest, I didn't particularly enjoy the job because I might be CEO and I could never be called senior clerk because in Asia the word clerk is seen as a lowly figure. But the chambers, particularly the juniors, this is and something I've talked to them about. This is not private. They never really got what I did, you know, and the same in Malaysia. Unless you've spent time in chambers in London and seen what the job of a clerk does, and you're practicing there as a barrister, it's quite difficult to understand my role. And so it was a bit of a mismatch as to what I was doing or how I should do it. So what was my job? My job was really primarily to try and get work, to guide them in their practice, to be a mentor, did some fee arrangement, but they wouldn't share their diaries. Not that they didn't want to share their diaries were all on their mobile phones, and though we had a diary system, I didn't have complete visibility of their diaries. So I worked very hard at it, but my contract was for 3 years, and I was sort of decided that I really wanted to go off and do my own thing. So so chief executive was really trying to do what I did in London, but it was pretty hard work. And I did make a difference for 3 years, but it wasn't like being in London. But Duxton is there, it's successful, it goes forward. I'm still part of it in some ways. I want to be part of it. I sort of in part created it with Toby and Joan Fay, and I want to see it continue. But I'm happier to do it outside rather than inside.
And would you be able to tell us about your current setup in your current company? What type of work are you involved with?
So I have now, which has become known as a virtual chambers. Toby Landau's wife, Nudra, described it a bit like MI6. They know it exists, but no one knows the membership. And I won't tell you the membership, other than I've got a starred public, well, I can name him, it doesn't really matter, but Chester Brown, who's regarded as the #1 public international lawyer in Australia, as part of my chambers. I've got Toby, I've got Calvin Liang at Duxton is part of my chambers. And these are all people in their own outfits, but I'm sort of helping them in different guises. I'm mentoring them. In Toby's case, I'm his global clerk. Calvin's case, can pick up work, I can still agree with fees. Different roles in different ways. I've got two senior accountants from Sydney with me, just being signed up. Gaurav Banerjee, a senior advocate from Delhi, part of me. 2 Silks in London, part of me. I've got a Malaysian lawyer in Kota Kinabalu with me. So I've got an increasing number of people that I'm working with on an annual contract, individual contract, paid quarterly, on Zoom, once a week, twice a month, once a month, just talking through what they're doing, how I can make a difference. I'm also acting for 3 law firms here, small law firms, helping them in the market outside Singapore. I mean, they're known in Singapore, but how I can make a difference outside Singapore. So it's a big brief. I'm not without work. If anything, it's slightly out of control. But I've got some backup help in KL, which is someone I've been working with and someone you've met, Gregory, GN Lee, who I brought him around to see you a few years ago. This is between us, but this will develop. But he's almost like my junior clerk now, with a sort of backup system in KL, helping me on the marketing side, helping me on the strategy, helping me maybe accounting, maybe getting together a group of young lawyers who can that we can bring in on cases. I mean, this virtual chambers will probably get across Asia rather than just be in Singapore. But it's a first. It's never been done before. And as I was saying to Toby, or Toby was saying the other day, would you believe it, David? 11 months ago, this idea wasn't there. And 11 months on, and my website's under construction. I've got a logo already developed, and I'm lucky to have a brand across the world. A lot of people know David Grief across the world. So people can see my virtual chambers. They'll know that I have really good people in my chambers. I will either get in and say, David, we've got someone who can help us, or do you know someone that can help us somewhere in the world? And if I can be a representative for the English bar, because I know the English bar, I know all the clerks, and I get a lot of phone calls these days and saying, we've got a criminal case, we've got a family case, we've got this case, IP case, where at the bar should we go? I've got trusted friends, senior clerks in the leading sets, they're never going to let me down, and I wouldn't want to let any firm asking me down by just giving them the right call, which goes back to my, where I started, where someone rings me up and says, who do you think? It sort of goes back to my roots. So that's, I'm doing all sorts of things, but that in the main is what I'm doing. And my website, when it's finally up, which hopefully in the next month, will describe it in sort of in a few paragraphs as to what I do.
No, that sounds amazing, David. I mean, and it's very unique as well. I don't think
there is any
setup like yours.
And it's COVID that's helped, because
Sure.
everything virtual. And what I will send, Gregory, is also the article that appeared in the Business Times here in Singapore last February, which described my job to the Singaporean market. And people in Singapore said to me, David, at last we understand what you do. So I'll send you the Business Times, because it will give you a snapshot on what my, to the Far East market as to what my job is.
Sure, thanks for that, David. If I can just move along. We have a number of junior and young barristers in our practice. What would you say a young barrister to promote their practices and become potential clients?
It's much easier in a set of chambers, because I've got a bunch of self-employed people, and you what I strive very hard at, and this sort of brings in another one of the questions, is making relationships with small firms out of London with small cases, getting the pricing right. Small firms coming to our chambers, they think, my blimey, we can come to Essex Court Chambers, get a really good deal, a very bright youngster to go and do our cases, and helping to develop their practice. It's too easy, and I see it a lot in law firms here, particularly the big law firms. You come into a law firm and you really don't get any until 5 years into practice, even then, because, as you say, the clients always want a lawyer with grey hair, and so it's quite difficult to break in. So your third chair, second chair, and I know there's in Singapore, in the UK. I don't know whether this goes on in Malaysia, where judges want to see the younger lawyers, and to take a witness, or often a witness that doesn't really matter, or making submissions on costs or doing something. But again, it's the client's call, and the clients don't want it. You can't force the clients to say, you've got to do this. So it is finding any which way for the younger bar to get exposure. But what you've got to do, younger bar to have confidence on their feet. And one thing that I try to encourage younger lawyers here is don't start at Drew and Napier, start at a small firm. Because and GM, who I just mentioned, he started with a small firm, Batchu Mohan Singh, and 1 year in, he was in court, 2 or 3 times a week, knockabout stuff before the AR, doing all sorts of a bit of crime. So when you move on to a bigger firm, you've got some confidence, and then you're sort of marketable to the bigger firm, because they say, hey, you're maybe only 2 or 3 years cool, but you've got the confidence to do it. And of course, the only way here I see it, and it happens a bit, is pro bono work, and which goes on. So it's every which way to get that exposure, and any chance to pick up cases as first chair. And it's probably easier to do it small arbitrations than cases in court. But it's all about price, and but sometimes firms may, in your market, may go to a smaller firm because they think that it could be cheaper, and of course you have a pricing structure, but maybe trying to sort of undercut a bit in the market, and encourage the clients, good clients with smaller cases who may not be able to afford your firm, to reduce the hourly rate, to give the junior people have a chance in the smaller cases. And it's what I spent time doing. And if there's any younger person within the firm that wanted to pick up the phone to me, or when I can come to KO and have a one-to-one to how do I do this, I'm very happy to talk to them, because it is a big challenge, and it's all about it really is.
That's right. But David, do you think specializing in a particular practice area helps with marketing?
At some stage, yes, but not at the beginning. My view is, to the English bar, when I used to say, when you come to the bar, do everything for the first 5 years. Because you've been at university, you will have, a lot of the work you would have seen at university, a lot of the work which you're now seeing in chambers, you would have never seen at university. And you said sort of life experiences. Just get out. In time, yes, you may be good at insurance, shipping, or international arbitration and different aspects of that, but don't specialize too early. And again, in the English bar, eventually, as you move towards silk, it's good to be seen to be good at something, because that can carry you through into silk. And also it's good on the form when applying for silk. But don't, certainly don't rush off thinking I must be known around town as the best person in fraud and asset tracing, or cybersecurity. I mean, all these buzzwords these days, cybersecurity, Bitcoin, whatever they want to specialize in. Get out there and experience it all. It's all about getting on your feet, and what I used to describe it as knockabout work. And then you will gradually attract bigger cases. Sure.
Now, David, we spoke earlier about your early days as a clerk, and how you would attend a number of face-to-face meetings. But in today's market, the marketing modes have become quite diverse. There's a number of ways one can market the firm or their practices online. Bearing that in mind, how important do you think is having face-to-face interactions or in-person interactions with potential clients when it comes to marketing?
I think it's vital because they need to see you and you need to see them. And I think personally, face to face, in person, and not online. At the moment, it's the next best thing. I had a phone call. I mean, this is my perspective. I had a phone call a few months ago. Firm in India, didn't know them, asking me whether Toby Lander could take on a case. Phone calls to India often find the accent a bit challenging as well. So I said, shall we Zoom? And he said, sure. And so I met this person over Zoom, and it went really well. Got to know him, can understand the case a bit more. He got to know me. We talked about all sorts of things, not just the case. So because it's not just about the case in hand, but it's just about, you can talk a bit about yourself, find out a bit about what the person you're talking to does, and whether you've got a passion for cycling or a passion for golf or a passion for sailing. And then it's not about the case, but it's suddenly you build up a relationship with this person.
Sure. And just on the topic of in-person meetings, something that was at one point before COVID fairly common here was networking events.
Yeah.
Do you think attending networking events is important when it comes to marketing?
I thought about that question. When I read that question, I thought about it a lot. Networking is pretty challenging. I find it difficult, because if you're at an event where you don't know too many people, I'm not very good at sort of siding into a group and trying to bust in on the party. And there's a certain type of person, and I'm not that person. There's a certain type of lawyer that can do it, just has the balls to go and do it. And I've seen many a barrister that are very challenged at networking. We've had parties in chambers inviting a law firm in, and you notice a bunch of juniors standing in the corner talking to themselves and not talking to the clients. I've seen it all. And it really depends on the event. If it's a sort of international arbitration event and it's pulling in people from other jurisdictions, yeah, they're good to go, because you just never know. And you might just meet the right person who's just at that moment got a case, and it could be on point, might be the right person. But I'm always very cautious about just turning up to any old event. I think one has to think about it carefully. Yeah, I mean, your firm putting on events with clients because you're selling the firm, which is all networking, yes, but choose carefully those that go, because there are some people that just don't enjoy it, are very challenged by it, and they shouldn't be, quite honestly, because they're so uncomfortable. They do themselves a bit of harm. So it really depends on the event, but not across the board. I mean, I used to get accused of going to everything, but that was more in London, because I knew a lot of people, and it was just good to be seen. But it's to be given a lot of thought before going off and doing it.
Sure. So would your advice be to be selective as to the types of networking events to attend, as well as who to send from the firm?
Yeah, agreed. And you don't always want to be seen at suddenly you'll think, oh, he's there again, or she's there again. Don't they have any work to do? So you've got to be really careful, because there are some people who are very good at doing their work and turning up at the events, but it can send the wrong signals.
Sure.
Be choosy.
Yeah, that's right. If I can just come back to marketing online, which is, I think, the norm in today's age. Do you think marketing online or through online portals like LinkedIn or even a firm's website could be as effective as the in-person marketing that we spoke about?
I'm a bit old-fashioned when it comes to this. I'm sort of trying to catch up. I mean, I'm sort of quite active on LinkedIn, much more than I used to be. But I have a PA that helps me with it. LinkedIn is important. I think everybody should have a LinkedIn profile. Everybody should be putting stuff out there on, you know, the latest this, the latest that, this article, the cases they've been on. If it's, but again, one shouldn't be doing everything. I mean, it all becomes a bit boring. But if there's a landmark case that the firm's been in, or a landmark case that a member of the, you know, a member of the firm is in, who wants to post it, because you'd be surprised the number of people that sort of like it, repost it, and it does go around the world. And then suddenly somewhere else in the world, someone has a case on point, and you could pick up work that way. I think cautious marketing in the firm's website, but not too much. And if you do marketing on websites, to make sure it's kept up to date, because I can tell you many websites talk about cases they did in 20, and they think, well, haven't you done a case since? It's like CVs. You've got to keep your CVs because they get very old very quickly. I was on a call to a junior at Essex Court Chambers in London. I needed his CV, and the first thing he said to me, David, I'll send you my CV. It's a bit out of date. I better bring it up to date. I mean, it's the standard patter. It's a bit out of date. So there's all sorts of things that you should be very conscious about, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Chambers, whether it's the firm's website, whether it's the CV. It's so important for it to be up to date, and particularly with LinkedIn to be relevant out there too often.
Sure.
One thing that I do, particularly with the three firms that I'm looking after, I'm often online just doing a like or making a comment or reposting. It all helps. It just it gets around the market. But I'm challenged by it myself. So anyway, so I'm learning.
Yeah. No, well, you know, setting up our LinkedIn account was something we only, fairly recently did. And I think a number of members of our firm have only recently been asked to set up their accounts and have it updated frequently. If we can just move on and to talk about the press. Do you think engaging the press and the newspapers is advisable when it comes to marketing?
I think it's a very, very simple answer. Be careful, because they're not your friends. They want to make a story or something, and a lot of what you tell them could be very boring. There's an angle they may want to run it on. So yes, press are useful, but just be very careful and know who you're talking to. And certainly in Chambers, we had identified people in Chambers who were those that spoke to the press, that nobody else. And be careful not to talk about your own cases. You know, try and get a friend in another firm to talk about something you've just done. There's nothing worse to be seen for blowing your own trumpet. And also, it's not always good to be talking about your own case, particularly if it's going to the Court of Appeal.
Sure, that's right.
Word of caution and take advice.
Sure. David, we spoke briefly about this earlier on the issue of touting. Sometimes, or rather fairly often, there can be a fine line between touting and marketing. Touting in our jurisdiction, and I think it's the same in Singapore, is unethical. How do you think practitioners and law firms could straddle that line effectively to ensure that they are marketing themselves properly?
So when it comes to sort of one-to-one, you know, firms doing a roadshow in other parts of the world, I have never cold called. I would never write to a law firm I don't know saying, hey, I'm in KL, can I come around and see you? I've always got someone to either email ahead and say, David Grief's in town, he's someone you should meet up with, and that's how it's happened. So again, I've been very conscious of touting. leg pulled by senior practitioners in the UK about touting. I used to get leg pulled by Clerk in London about David Grief's tours because they like to tease me, but it's never been touting. I've been right. It's a fine line, and be careful of what you do. Yeah, you can put stuff out. If you've got something useful to say, you've got a firm's blog, and you send it to your client base, or you send it to the Malaysian shipping group or the Malaysian arbitration center or whatever, and put it out that way. But it's making sure it's done at a professional way, and people then think, hey, this is really useful, but not to be looking like you're just on a market stall trying to sell the latest something or other. So again, it's advice from good business development.
Sure.
Can be effective.
Sure. If we can just move on to the last couple of questions that we have, and if I can take it together, perhaps, how do you think the approach to legal marketing has changed over the years, and are there likely to be any more changes in the year to come?
So I'm going to answer 20 first, and I'm going to answer question 21. As I said, I got help myself on 21 because I wasn't too sure what the answer was. So the answer to 20, over the years, I can now talk about 50 years, and it's massive, absolutely massive, where it was not acceptable to be marketing. And marketing only really happened at the end of the 80s, early 90s. And in the UK, it was the bar was ahead of the solicitors. You had firms' note paper, you had chambers' note paper. And it wasn't until the end of the 80s that the bar could suddenly have a red line on a piece of chambers' note paper or something. And then chambers' brochures came along. And then you had Legal 500. Then you had chambers. And then you had all these glossy magazines that came about. And it was that time, you wanted to be in Legal 500, you wanted to be in Chambers directory, you wanted the firm or Chambers to be in legal business, in legal that, and the lawyer and whatever. Again, with caution, there are some good journals and not some good journals. And then the internet comes along, which is just a game changer. So, and this only happened really in the last 30 years. Again, business cards. We didn't have, I did have business cards, but it wasn't the norm to have business cards much towards the end of the 80s. There was an explosion really in the 90s. And then at the end of the 90s, we had the internet and email. You talk to young lawyers now, life before email, life before internet, life before directories. They can't even perceive this as happening. So, and then you've got the whole social network is extraordinary. So that's I have seen massive changes, and I have to keep up to date with it. But I'm not a Luddite, but I run to catch up with it all the time, though I have moved with it in the 90s and the 2000s. Can I read out to you what the answer I was given to question 21, because I don't want to misinterpret it, and I think it's a very useful thing. And this was put out by G.N. Lee, who I mentioned earlier. And what he says in the answer to question 1 is, I think there is no one that fits all. Rule when it comes to marketing strategy, it very much depends on your practice and your personality. So how your marketing strategy will change in the coming years really depends on who you are and what you want to achieve. And as he does as an aside, this is where David Grief International Consultancy can come and help. That was the point. Having said that, there are 3 general trends you will see in the coming years. Law firm branding will matter less. The big firm branding will be less premium for most people. There'll be lots of independent specialists, so personal branding will be more important than the firm branding. And I've seen that, Allen and Overy, Freshfields, and it's all about, you don't hire Freshfields, you don't hire Allen and Overy, you hire a person who's good at oil and gas, the person who's good at arbitration or banking or fraud and tracing. Your first impressions online will be more important. Your website needs to be polished. Directories will be less important. The online generation is less likely to trust a legal 500 Chambers profile as compared to more authentic, genuine versions of your profile online. For example, a client is more likely to engage you if you have a strong social media presence which provides valuable insights. You come across as a genuine and authentic online. I hope that's a useful insight to the future. But I really do think that Jen's got that absolutely right. And there's some real clues there for your firm to think about going forward.
Sure, no, it's a fantastic response. But I can just pick up on something that was mentioned, which is personal branding. Now, how does one reconcile personal branding and personal marketing with marketing the firm as a group? Yeah,
I mean, doesn't it sort of come hand in hand? I mean, I can talk about it from a Chambers perspective. Toby Landau, who was the author with Lord Savile on the English Arbitration Act 1996. He really worked that and really cleverly worked that, either as a practitioner or as his flying around the world at events. But he was also a member of Essex Court Chambers. We had in Chambers Johnny Vida, we had in Chambers Martin Hunter, we had in Chambers Stuart Boyd, all the leaders in the world of arbitration. But it rubs off onto Chambers, and the junior members of Chambers benefit from that brand. So people ring up and say, "Hey, David, Chambers every year would win the Chambers Directory Award of the best set every year for arbitration." Well, certainly in my time, we won it 15 years in succession. I don't know what happens now, but I never wanted. I thought the day we'd stop winning that award is the day I had to give up. And of course that gets out into the market. The law firms recognise us and they say, "We've got a small case. Have you got a junior?" Because it's so you've got the seniors bring in the brand, but the brand is also Essex Court Chambers. So it goes hand in hand. So you'll always get the work as being the leader in the field, but the firm will also get the work, but not something doesn't always stand you, and you say, "Well, actually, it ought to be someone else." And that's having a client relationship that the client says, "Fine, if you recommend this person within the firm, that's where we'll go with it."
Sure. And if I can just ask one more question, and I think it may be a follow-up to what was said in answer to the change in marketing. That there was a reference to legal directories. Do you still see that as a main feature in decision-making by clients as to who to go to?
I think the savvy clients will not choose you because it's in a directory. It's part of what's needed. And when I never go to a restaurant without maybe what the Michelin guide might say, but I wouldn't trust the Michelin guide. I'd always speak to someone who's been there, or someone who knows someone who's been there. So they're valuable, but they're not the only thing. They make a lot of money out of lawyers. The guy who started the Chambers directory, Michael Chambers, I mean, he's retired with an absolute fortune. Good on him. I mean, I don't take it away from him. I find directories are misleading because other people in those directories that shouldn't be there because they take the people that write the stuff out for lunch, out for drinks, out for dinner. So as GN said, they have a shelf life, and it's not the only things these days. But at the moment, you've got to be there, and if you're not there, then people will question why you're not there. So Toby Landau is another example. You know, he gets very fussed as to why he's not in the directories. He is in the directories, and very keen to be more in the directories in Asia. He doesn't need to be because he's a brand on him, you know, Landau across the world. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need directories, but he's very conscious that he wants to be there. So, you know, at the moment, it's important.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, David. I mean, those are the questions that I had. I'm just going to open up the floor to the rest of the firm to see if anyone had any questions of their own to ask you, David.
I'm very happy to take any questions, but if anybody's got a question which they'd rather talk to me privately about, then you know where I am, here in Singapore in the same time zone, and pick up the phone anytime you like.
Great, thanks for that, David. I'll also share with the others your email address as well.
Yeah.
Get in touch with you through email.
And I will send you those 3 articles, which just may expand a bit more about my life and what I've done and my future.
Thanks, David. Yeah, no, I'll be more than happy to have a look at it.
And I can't wait for the day that I can come back to your offices, which I've been to many times, just to sit in that very room that you're probably sitting in, to just, you know, have a coffee and meet people who, you know, and that's what it's all about.
Yes, yeah, no, that'll be very nice. And I think, yeah, Jern Clay has been to our offices as well.
Yeah. Quite a few, you know, David Joseph has been there, and Roderick Could. I mean, quite a few members of London Chambers I've walked through when I've been there. And if I can say that there's one person, a bit of a plug, one person who is well known in the Malaysian market, a member of Essex Court Chambers, Australian, guy called Lucas Bastin.
Yeah.
He has just taken Silk. He works with Maxis, and that's you know, if you're looking at a sort of thoroughly good person in the world of arbitration, particularly investor state, Lucas is one of those people that I alluded to earlier, who's approachable, got everything, got it all, plus he's not going to bite your head off when you ring up with a silly question.
Yeah, no, you're very right about him. I did get a chance to meet him with Stephen. I think it was during there was a conference in the AIAC, the Arbitration Center here, yeah, and he came down for that, so I did get a chance to meet him. Yeah, very personable.
Yes, and I encouraged him to go to that. So there you are. That was, you know, that's why he was there. I think another point which I just want to touch on is sort of marketing, perhaps selling yourself. So sometimes a firm rings up. Sometimes a firm or a client is shopping for a law firm or for a set of chambers, and sometimes giving them the first, you know, 15 minutes, hour for nothing works, and you may well do that already. But sometimes people think, wow, gosh, that is just something better than somebody else has done. You know, they have a foot in the door, you have a foot in the door, and you've got to be careful. You don't want to be conflicted because you don't want to not get the case and not be able to pick it up from the other side. But sometimes clients, something very simple, getting something for nothing is good to do, and it's often what I do, and it's what I've done recently with Lucas, because he's one of my clients. You know, I'm working with him in my new setup, is just offering 15 minutes on the phone, and it is that just added extra. Sometimes, you know, you've got to, you know, it's like going to the supermarket, what's on offer, you know, what's free this week, but you just have to sort of think outside the traditional ways and as to how you can do it. Because pricing is another big thing in all a challenge and how to attract the clients.
Well, that's right. That's
Okay.
Well, David, I think we can perhaps end our session there. And I'll just remind the others in the firm that they can reach out to you if they see the need to by email or even mobile contact or even on your LinkedIn. I'll pass around those details. But thanks very much, David, for your time. I think that was very informative. Many new things were shared with us. And we hope to see you in person when things open up.
And I'm very grateful for you giving me the opportunity. This forum, fireside chat with questions, is something I much prefer. The idea of standing up for half an hour and talking, I don't enjoy that at all.
Yeah.
Again, it takes, as we said earlier, it takes a certain type of person who's prepared to do that, and I'm not one of them. And this is a format that I'm very comfortable with. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No, it was our pleasure to have you. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, and good evening to you all. Okay, bye-bye.